Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Missle Industries' Found Fairmont XB Hardtop 351 project. Now, as mentioned in the last episode, it's exhaust building episode today. Now, I did this project on my wagon probably a year ago, almost to the week. And I did it over the course of 3 or 4 episodes because it was a bit of a stop-start, stumbling kind of process with putting the headers in, getting all of that to work, and then mocking together the exhaust system and then figuring out how to get it all to go over the diff nice and neatly with my leftover VY Commodore exhaust system. But this time round I only have the remainder of that terribly butchered Lukey exhaust system that came with this car and a bunch of new stuff. So I've already knocked together the merge pipe and the V-band flanges, and I've tacked these pipes together in the hope that these will fit down the transmission tunnel next to the tail shaft, which I have roughly mocked into place as well. You'll be pleased to know that off screen I have actually bolted that engine down so it's sitting on the engine mounts with the engine mount bolts bolted up, and the subframe for the gearbox is also installed, although it did take an awful lot of ginning around to get it right because the flanges were pretty much right up next to the subframe, which was not going to work. So I ended up clearancing the subframe, and then when that wasn't giving me the result that I wanted, I decided to make more sense to notch the bolt holes for the transmission mount so I could push the transmission mount further forward, and that way I could slide the subframe further forward away from the flanges as well, which turned out to work alright. But then I discovered what I actually need to do was slide the subframe further to the to the left of the car. So I ended up notching out the holes to mount the subframe gearbox mount into the subframe, so the subframe holes got notched so I could move the subframe 5mm to the left, and the engine mount got notched so I can move it forward in the car. And that has given me enough clearance around the right exhaust, which was sitting hard up against the subframe before all that started. So that took many hours, but as it sits now it all makes sense, and I'm reasonably confident I can start building an exhaust system around it, because it's going to take ages before I drive this car anywhere. So I plan to fabricate the exhaust system up, and if it rattles against the subframe a little bit during road testing, again I'll address that problem when it arises. I should probably add, I have the merge pipe, and that's already a 90-degree bend there. That's 2 halves of a 90-degree bend. I've got 2 9-inch hot dog style resonators. I've got the 2 Lukey mufflers that I salvaged off this old exhaust system, and I bought 2 more bends, and these are the 2 straight sections I had left over from my wagon project, which I never actually used. So this time I will deploy them, add these resonators in. I think I'm going to go resonators in front of those Lukey mufflers because they're pretty much resonators dressed up as mufflers. So all it is a perforated tube that goes like that through the muffler. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is position these so the mufflers are on the inside trajectory, so they'll go along the transmission tunnel, and whether I have to angle these out or in or whatever will be determined underneath the car. These will exit and go over the diff with the existing over the diff exit pipes that came with the car, because sure they are grubby and pitted with rust, but I can salvage them and I can just weld some more metal onto the ends of them to make them look tidy again, because the chrome tips on the exhaust that came with the car have been pitted and neglected with age, so I'm not going to use those. I should mention I've also got a couple of reproduction muffler mounts. So what I might do is tack those onto the back of those Lukey mufflers. What I might do is tack these onto the back of the Lukey mufflers so that I can hang them under the car with a couple of axle stands underneath them, so I can position them to see where I need things to go. I actually quite like the muffler fabrication part of the whole gig. It's getting all this to work. I just like it. But for the time being, let's get this under the car and see if it makes sense. So as I mentioned earlier, clearance was a big drama with this, particularly on the right bank there. It might not look like much there, but there's probably about 2 or 3 millimeters worth of clearance there now. I had heaps and heaps of clearance on the left bank, so nothing hits there, and nothing hits there with a casual swing off it, so it will do for the time being. I've got the tail shaft loosely mocked in too. Hopefully that doesn't weep any well, but I should actually put that shifter in too because it's actually coming up in the right spot, so I can select gears. It's currently in gear, which I think is reverse, so I should probably take it out of gear just for convenience sake. But anyway, let's get cracking. Let's get crack-a-lackin'. Not terribly well centered, is it? This one here is going off that direction. This one here, too close to the tail shaft. Alright, after a bit of late night ginning around, I have the basic layout. Merge pipe at the front, the Lukey mufflers at the back. I've welded the hangers on so they can just hang there. Obviously I'm using axle stands to get them reasonably close to where I want them. And all that remains is for me to figure out what sections of metal I'm going to need to use to get from here to here, and those factory overriders that go over the diff. I should be able to make those work once I shorten that radius there. It's too long because the muffler's hung down really low on the original exhaust system, which I'm completely going to go away from because I want my mufflers tucked up nice and high like a pair of testicles on a cold day. So that will do for tonight. Alright, day 3 of exhaust system building. And I've pulled this abomination out of the yard because I think I'm going to steal these radiuses here. I'm going to cut it all the way down there at that janky join there and have an attempt at cleaning this up so I can use this radius, these 2 radiuses here, to step the pipe from transmission tunnel out to the space underneath the car where the muffler sits. And it's by my dead reckoning that is actually pretty close to the length that I'm going to need. So what I'm going to do is roughly cut it underneath that janky weld and then use the drop saw to get it nice and neat on this side of the janky weld before it gets too late in the evening and I start to upset my neighbours. So I'm going to get into that, and then that way I'll be able to see if that pair of radiuses there works. This isn't mandrel bent, it's just regular bent, but it'll do if it provides me with a nice easy solution, and I can save my mandrel bends and pipe for future projects. I'm probably going to deploy a number of exhaust systems through this car because I'd like to fine tune how my Cleveland sounds. Might even try an H-pipe in the future, but maybe not. Probably just a whole bunch of mufflers, to be honest, because I'd like to recreate the sound the sedan had, but with a merge pipe. So that might require me to buy some Flowmasters or entertain a 3-inch exhaust, but the critical thing with this project is ground clearance. Ground clearance, ground clearance, ground clearance. And since I managed to make that very long wagon scrape just the tiniest amount at the top of the driveway, right where the header flanges are, I'm hoping with the shorter wheelbase hardtop with some 15s on it will be fine in my driveway. No scrapage whatsoever, as long as everything's tucked up nice and tight. I'm pretty optimistic because the wagon has been really great in terms of ground clearance, and if I use V-band flanges instead of 3-bolt flanges, even better still. So let's crack on. I'm sure these will tidy right up. Just gotta grind away all this splooge. "45 centimeters. Looks pretty close. Maybe I'll just whack some pipe onto here and then trim it down to suit. Alright, I need to add very little to the length of this to get it to work, so I'm just going to bang on a couple of nice long pieces so I can trim everything up to suit. And that will give me options to shorten this end by by a lot. So I'll just tack these together, this one and then this one. Should be all good. It occurs to me just now that since I'm using the same drop saw to cut these pieces of pipe, it does kind of cut on a slight angle for whatever reason. Now, so if I rotate the pipe one way or another, it actually makes the pipe more or less straight depending on how the cut is situated. So just going to gin around with it for a bit. and then put my welding clamp on it, play with it a bit more, and then tack it up. That looks pretty good. Okay, so that is probably going to give me enough length to get done what I need to do. These ends here will need a bit of creative tidying up because they're pretty janky. As far as this evening is concerned, mission accomplished. Let's just eyeball them under the car again. Yes, for sure. A little bit of finessing. This will totally work. Alright, it's Saturday afternoon and I've had a change of tap. What I think I'm going to do is discard those two crappy pieces of regular bent pipe and just cut some sections of straight pipe. And then I'm going to open up that X pipe so these run nice and neatly along the transmission tunnel next to the tail shaft, where I will then figure out a way to get them to connect neatly with the mufflers that are currently hanging under the car. So I'm just going to work my way towards the back of the car from the X pipe and then along the tail shaft, and then once I get to the mufflers I will figure out what cuts I will need to make to connect these two sections here with a pipe flare at one end each onto the Lukey mufflers, and then from there I'll figure out how I'm going to connect those to the diff. I still have two 90s down there to cut segments out of, so I should theoretically be cooking with gas. But first things first, I'm going to cut the other one of these so I have two of these lengths go under the car. I'll do that now. This is very close to being what I need on the right side of the car, so what I might do is pull this one in a bit so it comes more parallel to the tail shaft, and then I'll push this one out a bit so it's more parallel to the tail shaft. So both of those lengths of pipe will be spot on. If I can just get that more in the middle of that gap there, and I can use the flex in the hanger to make this all work. That's looking very promising. Now that I've cut those welds and left the 2 welds, and let me move these pieces this way, hopefully it'll make sense under the car, and I can just tack it in once the pipes go over there, and they all make sense and everything lines up, and I'll lock it in like that. A small gap down here equals a big increase here, so I will just bridge the gap with weld. Starting to think that I will just weld these up and then adjust everything at this point here. And once I get that angle there right, everything else will just work. So I might tack these together and then use the slip joints here to finesse it till I can get these angles correct. That's starting to look like an exhaust system, isn't it? So I've just tacked all those parts together. Now I need to rehang the hangers. Hopefully this all makes sense once it's under the car and I have clearance. If not, I'm going to have to unpick everything and start again. Alright, I think with a bit of fine tuning that will do the trick. I just need to make sure that this all moves over towards the drive shaft at this end here. This one here is adequate, but that one on the other side is not, mainly because I haven't really bent it this way. So what I think I'm going to do is drop that pipe off, bend that out a little bit, rejoin them, and then go from there. Tempted to whip those radiuses off so I can trim them up and then just adjust them to suit until I've got the clearance that I want. That might work, but then I might have not enough at the back there, so I'm very tempted to pull those mounts off and just move the mounts further this way on these mufflers, so the mufflers are closer to the centre of the car. That way I can tuck them up further, because that would be advantageous. Great news! I have got my exhaust system to hang under the car without smashing into anything. So I've modified that cut there to pull the pipe away from the floor. So that's done. I've tacked it back together again. Now it runs more parallel to the drive shaft, which is a good result. I've got plenty of space between the pipes and the floor pan. I've got the mounts loosely mocked in at the back there. I've modified the mounts because the easiest way I could cheat these pipes over was just to put a bracket on the mount and move the mounts inboard to move the exhaust pipes closer to the tail shaft. That might hamstring me when I try to put the pipes over the diff, but I'm prepared to cut and shut quite a bit of stuff to get that to work. I've got an entire day tomorrow to have at it, but so far that is all tacked together. Added brackets to those mounts just to move everything inboard, and that is working a treat. I could have cut the brackets off the mufflers and re-welded them, but that would have meant the muffler would have been hanging offset, and I didn't want to fatigue it out, and I was too lazy to cut it up anyway, so I just made some brackets up, bolted the brackets to the floor, and that has moved my exhaust system inbound, and I find that to be pretty satisfactory. I'm not sure how it's going to go with the resonators ahead of the mufflers, but yeah, this is all an experimental phase. And from here, that's looking pretty damn good. I like it. Of course, once this is all welded up, it might all buckle and warp and move everywhere, but I'll endeavour to do as much of it under the car as I can so it maintains its position, and then get it all out in one go and weld it all up. As day 4 draws to a close, I need to figure out where these muffler tips need to come out, so I've put that blue rear valance, I guess you call it, apron. We'll go with valance. That valance has gone on. It's got cutouts for both exhausts. That's the factory cutout, that's one that's just been enthusiastically added in. But that'll do. So now I need to figure out how those pipes are going to hang, whether I can attach them to the car from the rear muffler hangers. It's got one, and then figure out what I need to do under the car to get it all to work. But that's probably going to be a project for tomorrow, which will be day 5 of this muffler project, and we'll catch up then. Okay, day 5 is upon us, and I have decided I'm going to sacrifice my remaining 2 radiuses to try and get those pipes over the diff to work. I've already tacked up some V-band flanges to go on the output side of the 2 Lukey mufflers, and once I cut the straight bit off these radiuses, I will tack the other side of the V-band onto here, and then obviously after that I will figure out how much of this needs to remain to get it to work with those existing pipes that go over the diff. And while I was scrounging around, I found these old muffler tips from the exhaust system that I cannibalized for the wagon, and these weren't really going to work for the wagon because I went side pipe, and obviously this to the side looks ugly, but it could possibly work for the back of this hardtop. So if everything goes well and I figure out how to get this all to hang and work, I will smash these tips on, because I reckon that'd be alright. Alright, I have my V-band flange made up for the rear section of the exhaust, and obviously this slides into the Lukey muffler, this clamps onto it, and then I have to figure out how that's going to work in relation to the rear pipes that came with the car that I plan to utilise. So let's go have a look, see what works. So it's late in the afternoon on day 5, and as you can see here, I've cut my radius, I've got my V-band clamp on, and this is going to get stuffed into the back of one of those Lukey mufflers, which I'll tack into place using the squint technique, and then that will be one side done. At the rate I'm going, seeing as I don't have a mount on this side, I might be calling it at that point, because this hopefully go in, it has a hanger to hang off. Once I've tacked that into place, that will be where it will stay. I've had to move the whole exhaust system forward in the car by 15mm because I couldn't get that bit there to clear the diff, but now it does, so we're all good. So a bit of ginning around, but I'm getting there. Summary time for episode 20 of Missle Ford Falcon 351 hardtop project, and that exhaust system is tacked in. I'm not going to get any more carried away than that for this episode. I'm still missing one rear hanger which I don't have, and I'm going to have to order. I didn't put the Commodore tips on the car because I've run out of time. Everything is tacked into place and its holding position clearances are good, so at some point I'll pull all those sections out and carefully weld them up, hoping against all hope that everything remains aligned and it still works. The annoying thing with V-band flanges is when you connect everything together, everything has to be just so. So if one of them twists or things go together a bit wonky, they just don't seal. And I'm hoping, since I've carefully tacked this all together, particularly in the centre there, once they're all welded up, the flanges are still going to sit flush against the header flanges, and it will all work. I'm going to have some leeway at that end, but I'm reasonably pleased with the way that's all gone, and it should theoretically come apart quite easily, because obviously V-band flanges, you just undo the V-band and drop it down. It's nice and easy. So that's as carried away as I'm going to get. I did a tally just before of all the money I spent to build that exhaust system. Obviously I reused the headers that came with the car, the Lukey mufflers, and the sections that go over the diff that aren't mandrel bent, I might add, they're just regular. And it cost me another $500 in materials to supply everything else for the exhaust system to be bent, so that's the hangers that I bought, the V-bands, the lengths of pipe, the angles, and those other small hot dog resonators. So $508 I think it was all up in materials, plus my labour obviously, and gas and welding wire, but we won't worry about any of that. So that's even better than that car. But that car started with no exhaust, and I had to build from scratch with all the things that I could cobble together. So if memory serves me correctly, that was $750 to build the merge pop exhaust for that. mainly because I still had the exhaust lying around from the Commodore that I looted the engine out of for my LS project. But this one already had an exhaust system, it just wasn't that great. So hopefully what I've done is an improvement, and eventually when I start the car I hear the sweet, sweet sound of a merge pop Cleveland. So that will do.